you
Yeah.
recording, Cory?
Yes, I'm recording.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Excuse me. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm really, I guess I'll just kind of give my brief overview of like what, working with open air has been great. And I've done like a few residencies, but Kate and I were talking about like how great the community aspect's been. Like as an artist, as an introvert, like I think my status quo is like working in isolation and kind of like, really like, being a nerd behind a computer screen most of the time. But it's been really nice to experience being, having like this cohort that we get to like check in with and like these community stuff, and even like this gathering tonight where we get to kind of hang out and I can kind of share my process. So that's been like, it's been amazing, fantastic. And I think that's one of the big things in general about working in residencies is kind of really putting me outside of my comfort zone and kind of really expanding my thought process. I think kind of going into this, I have a certain, rough outline or expectations, but really I think the beautiful part is kind of breaking down those expectations and kind of really learning about, the history, the area, and the community. And I feel like there's so much going on in those, intersecting parts of Traveler's Rest. It's been, it's almost hard to digest because it's like, at this point, I feel like I still trying to figure out what the story is. But what I'll do is I'll kind of talk about some of my previous work and kind of how that kind of led up to what I do here. I'm a game designer. I teach game design at also, I think, a broader sense of interactive media. I honestly have like this greater lens of art. I think all art is interactive in a certain sense where it relies on other people to kind of engage with the artwork, and I'm always interested in that aspect. Almost like a form of communication. So I'm kind of curious how people engage my work to the point that I started making games. So one of my early residencies, I spent some time out in rural Kansas, and like I started off in a town of called Matfield Green during the Tallgrass residency, population 30, and like this town was like crazy small, not a whole lot of like buildings left, but there was this schoolhouse. So I kind of created this short narrative of this game around what it was like, going to school there. And like it closed in like the late 90s. So this was kind of like the era I was like, well, I'll create a game around the 90s, and what did it look like there as a way of kind of telling stories. And let's see if this works on the internet. Just kind of like an intro. And get sound, which is okay, because then I can just talk over it. Let me get a little bit of sound.
Oh, thanks.
Right, I'm a parent, so I'll kind of throw I have my oldest is this little blonde girl, right? What I like about games and technology is accessibility. Like this is hosted, online through websites, so people can see and interact with my art from all over the world. At least I hope so. I don't know if I, But, and again, this is just kind of a way of interpreting, I guess, the town of Matfield Green, and kind of centered around this school and this story. But I also have I come from Colorado before living here, and I lived next to one of the largest cattle processing plant in our country, JBS. So I got really fascinated with cows. This is just kind of how my brain goes, and you can see I'm kind of wearing this cow suit. So I didn't do that. But I'm out there in Matfield Green, Kansas, wandering around doing research, and I run into this cattle ranch, and I ended up working with these cattle ranchers and making I guess you would consider it a game for cows, but using these remote collars to do remote herding patterns, so to help them not overeat certain areas, and cattle ranchers not to rely on fences, because fences are a pain to put up and they break and all this kind of stuff. So they could herd from the comfort of their own houses on their iPad and move these cows around. And at the time, this is kind of coming out of the pandemic, being trapped inside, looking at screens myself, And I found this image online of like farmers using VR headsets on cattle to aid in milk production. Like they like the theory was that, you know, if you put like this lens of like pastoral beautiful lands on a cow, that they're going to produce more milk and they're going to be happier cows. And I was like obsessed with this, and I was just reaching out to all these different, you know, news articles, and nobody would get back to me. So then I was like, forget it, I'm gonna create my own VR cow simulators. That's what this little screen is here, and like this little image here up in the right hand corner, where like I put VR goggles into cow masks, where people had to actually wear like these VR cow masks and interact a life as a cow. But yeah, these are like the weird connections I kind of create when I go off on these strange, yeah, like artist residencies and stuff. So spending some time out and like driving around like rural Colorado, I came across, this is, yeah, not a great segue, but another project I was working on was out in rural Colorado. There's this town called Deerfield, and it was this all-black community that started out in like the 1920s, trying to escape, you know, the KKK and a bunch of racism. So they created their own town that ended up like accumulating like nearly like 350 people. But you know, like a lot of the racist tendencies out there, they sold them really terrible land. So the Dust Bowl came and wiped them out, and the town was just decimated. And this is what remains of like maybe 2 buildings out there. And this Deerfield restoration project has been going on for a couple of decades now. And just watching, you know, these buildings just crumble, crumble, crumble. Being a digital artist, I was like, well, I can recreate this digitally. So I created an augmented reality app. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Pokemon Go, but you can use your phone as like a pocket robot or a gaming device and use the camera that projects like a 3D environment in the real world. So you can show up to the site and recreate some of these buildings and the history. You can actually go around inside of it. And the app kind of brings you through, like, you know, use gamified elements through the story of this, you know, lost town. So kind of similar to stuff I'm doing here is like I'm really interested in the history of Traveler's Rest and kind of looking at, you know, the stories and stuff like that went involved. But this time I'm more interested in using VR and kind of something that's more enclosed, because the capabilities of VR again isn't, you know, so site specific, and it can be a lot more immersive than just looking through your phone. So I'll show, what I'll do is I'll show one of like the kind of like a trailer video I created of a night scene, and then I'll do like a live feed of what I'm developing here on my computer, and you can kind of see what that looks like. So let's see.
We've made it further than anyone else before us. The river's been a guide, but we still don't know what lies ahead.
I know, Merriweather. I've been thinking about the mountains we'll have to cross. It's going to be tough, but we've got the right men with us. They trust us.
True. The men are doing well, but morale can shift quickly if things get rough. We need to keep pushing. But we also need to keep them motivated.
You're right. We'll need to keep the roots steady and make sure we're always looking for signs of food and shelter. If we can keep our heads, we'll make it to the Pacific.
The Pacific. I've thought about that a lot. What will we find on the other side? Are we ready for it?
We're ready because we've prepared every step of the way. Just one day at a time, Lewis.
You're right. We'll get there. Together.
Together.
So rather than seeing through the rest of the trailer, I'll just show you the live product. And again, like a lot of this stuff is, I think what I would consider a sketch, and me just kind of jotting down ideas. I haven't really dived too much into like the stories I want to tell. I've been focused mostly on like the visual elements, and there's a lot to take on that. So let's see if I can switch this over to my other computer, which I'm running the software on. Great, that works. And we'll test this out. Cool. Sounds like it's working. And you'll be able to see like kind of what I'm seeing at the same time through this lens. And I started in a tree. And again, and at this point, like again, I'm just kind of taking in like the surroundings. My time here has just been going on like kind of like walking the trail and seeing what the trees and the plants kind of look like, and just placing everything out. But also like, working in VR, especially this type of VR stuff, like it's really big on optimization, because this thing's like technically like a smartphone. So there's not a whole lot of power in it. It's portable, which is nice. But you're rendering like almost two different games out of two different lenses. So you can kind of get this virtual, effect. So I've done several versions of this, and like I'll get to the point where I build too much and then it crashes and I have to rebuild it. So this is like version 3. So I'm like going slower and kind of playing around. I still have to like, if you notice the shadows aren't all the way built. That's stuff that you have to like render, and they call it baking, to kind of do it ahead of time. But really just trying to get, at this point, like mostly the visual elements and the lay of the land. As I'm kind of like, listening to audiobooks and reading some of the histories and really thinking about, what's the overarching narrative that I want to focus on throughout this piece. But yeah.
How are you pulling in or referencing? Are you like referencing details of the environs? Or?
Yeah, I'm doing a couple things, right? Like there's, I can pull up, just like I've been just doing a lot of textures. And then you can, like, the cool thing about the textures, you can just drop them right into the game. Anywhere from like, like the bark and stuff like that on logs to, like the ground and all that. But then also, like, I think there's, just trying to get like where the river was, from what I understand, it's kind of moved a couple times. So like trying to keep that, open mind and like keep some flexibility there. I know there's some dioramas out there. I'm trying to use those as just like place markers and kind of thinking, okay, where did like the campsites actually, so that you kind of like, set up, and notice of that. But also like there's confines within like the game environment, right? Like kind of creating, extra mountain ranges that are a little bit up close to kind of encase the environment. Because, if I build up too much of an area, it's almost too much to explore, not just for like the system, but it's also, I think, for the person within it, right? It's almost like too much where like, if you have them like too much to wander off into, like, you don't give them enough of a direction or focus. So kind of like finding that balance of like, okay, I'm gonna kind of make this a little bit smaller, a little bit more enclosed, but still have like that base type stuff. That I'm still going around and kind of like collecting some of the elements. I think that most of my stuff is more like, late spring, early summer. So it'll be kind of cool to come back and kind of snap some more photos of that. I'm gonna play around doing like night scenes too. It'd be kind of neat to throw some more seasonal changes in there. But really for right now, just getting like the basic terrain.
Awesome. Can I ask about the voices you used? Are they AI generated as well?
The script, and that's the same thing. Like even like the script, right? Like with AI generated.
Wow.
And yeah, like it's pretty cheesy, and like I'm not, like, again, like I'm not really diving deep into the story just yet.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm just kind of like looking at different just visual elements and different scenery as kind of a foundation.
Do you have a view of Lolo Peak anywhere?
No, I
Since
should though,
that's
yeah.
so iconic, so maybe you don't have to like go all the way over there, but
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah, and like there's certain like
Iconic.
markers that I think that's interesting that you're talking about. Some of like the historic trees too that were like around from when Lewis and Clark was, you know, here, and it'd be kind of cool to have some of those like, you know, visually, you know, depicted here and kind of communicate.
A lot smaller though, right?
Yeah.
A little
Right.
distorted.
Yeah, and like I think there's ways to do that. Like even with like, you know, having like some of the background elements, there's ways of like mapping the skyline and converting that into like a dome almost, and kind of putting in here for stuff like like the different, you know, background markers, which would be nice.
I think this is awesome. We have so many volunteers who come here that want to picture themselves at Travelers Rest in 1805, and this is such a cool,
That's fun.
you know, opportunity for them to maybe have that experience.
Right? And
Yeah.
and I agree, and I think that's what I think excites about the technology. But I think what I struggle with is like I'm just an artist, right? I'm a game developer, I'm not a historian. So I feel like that's what bogs me down, is kind of like really trying to find the accuracy. And like, because it's not just one story too, like it's a bunch of different perspectives and stories, and like how do you represent all those stories fairly, and you balance that? Yeah, I think those are the challenges that I think I kind of run into sometimes when I start thinking about how to represent history.
Well, if you ever really want to dig into the accuracy,
Yes,
boy, I have people
I would
like
love to. That's
I
why
can
I'm
introduce
here.
you, but
Yeah.
they'll be like, you have to have the exact right number of horses,
Right?
and you know, they're very they
Accurate.
yeah they have
Yeah.
dug so deeply into the
Yeah.
story, right? That maybe they can see it in their heads, but
Yeah.
this is
Right, and that's what like,
taking
I
what's
need,
in here out.
and that's what I need, and that's why I like doing, you know, recipes like this in collaborations, because then it like pairs me with the people that know the stories,
Right.
the experts that I can, you know, do the nerd stuff and translate it.
Okay.
so in this game, is the player a character?
I don't know
Or you
yet.
just, why?
I don't know if it's
This
like one of the.
camera is you showing pictures of what you're seeing, but if a person played this game, can they pick? I don't play
And that's
video games, so
part
like,
of it.
you
Yeah,
have
it's
to
like
pick
one.
who you want to be.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know if
Sorry?
like, I think having like the choice element of like 33 different characters, I think would be challenging. Because that's just within the group that went with Lewis and Clark. Like, so I think focusing on one of those is kind of my idea, is like, okay, which one of the 33 can I kind of focus on? And I think that would be, again, kind of give the person involved with the game enough of a direction and need to like scope of a game too.
So that's point of view, I guess you'd call it, like
Yeah,
whose
totally.
view. What if it was, because you have, you know, conquering settlers and
Yeah,
native people.
And that's the challenging
the
part.
duality of it.
Yeah.
You could have a neutral player, like, I was saying, I love hearing the crickets at night. Crickets is like one of my favorite sounds. Like
yeah,
the pecking of a woodpecker,
yeah,
you know, like a lot of natural sounds would be cool. I wondered if one of the characters could be a bird,
yeah,
because they could fly over, so you could do some really cool
yeah, I love that.
seeing, like a map almost, but
Yeah.
seeing it from above lets you sense the space, I think, better than walking through it. Because when I walk through something like that, I'm like, I have no idea where I am and
Totally.
where to go. But
Yeah, no, I love that.
maybe that character could see
Yeah,
different things with, you know, over time and
Yeah.
change, or the duality of
I think
these people and those people.
It's interesting too to consider who the audience would be. Like if it's younger people, maybe you go with George Shannon, who was the youngest member of the Corps, and
Yeah.
like doesn't have a ton of detail in his background, like enough to connect to a college age student, right?
And maybe they'd have lots of questions, being the youngest, so that could be laid out, like
Or you
curiosity.
can use the dog.
yeah,
Dog,
I
yeah.
thought about that too.
Dog.
Need a dog.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, like having like more of the untold stories, I think as an artist it interests me, and it kind of like, I think opens up more opportunities to like, I guess tell that story, but also like less pressure on depicting it in a certain way or a way.
I'm definitely gonna, like Sony just whispered in my ear, do a little matchmaking. I'm definitely gonna send you some of our Clarkies.
Yeah.
I don't know if I explained this. They're like Trekkies, but it's Lewis and Clark instead of Star Trek, so we call them the Clarkies. Tell me when you're ready, because I don't want to overwhelm you.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Just kind of like, I've hit up that library back there, but it's like, it's daunting. There's a lot of books, and like, I've read some books online, and like, but there's so much material out there, and kind of picking what direction is there. So.
Okay, awesome.
Cory, can you talk about how your relationship between, I might be getting the terms wrong, but like narrative and game mechanics, like reward systems and navigation, like how do you approach them? Is one more dominant for you and the other's informed by one, or they kind of work hand in hand? I mean, there's a lot of elements that you're dealing with inside of this. How do you see
And
yourself?
I think that what's great about game design, I feel like the boundaries are breaking and opening up. I think that there's a lot, I think games are leaning more on the narrative side. Because like audiences, there's certain, particular audiences that would rather do that than like play like a typical, like slasher type game or stuff like that. That's kind of what like I lean more towards of like storytelling and narratives, and kind of using like stuff that's more experiential, like experience, than stuff that's too mechanic heavy. I think there's enough has to be there to like keep audiences engaged. But really, like this idea of immersive technology, like the right book can be immersive if the story's there. So I think that it's a broad sense. It's really that I think at the heart of what I create, I think the story is the most important. Then as a visual artist, that's kind of like how I think that I tell stories the best. But I think that too, like it has to be engaging in a way that people want to kind of continue to like interact with it. Stuff that you can kind of do in this medium that you can't in others, right? You can pick stuff up. You can like, do certain activities that you necessarily couldn't do without it, right? And I think that's what's kind of interesting about not just, VR, but kind of doing it around like this historical lens too.
Yeah, and like, I've played some games where like survival is part of it. There's combat, but I don't, some interesting ones where it's like famine and wildlife. The journey, the Lewis and Clark journey was very much wrapped around their mortality
staying
and
alive.
Vulnerabilities around that.
And I guess those parts, like as a game designer, seem easier to me. Like gathering food or like getting resources, and all that. I guess more like, more typical, I would say, like in my field, than the more historical stuff. But I thought about that. I guess like I haven't thought about it as much as the history stuff, because that's a part that I guess is kind of intimidating me right now. So.
Can I ask a technical question?
Yes.
I don't play video games at all. So when you're in a space like this and you want to make it look like the space, do you rely on photographs? Like how do you go about doing that?
It's great because I'm here, right? So I can kind of like, I've been taking a lot of photographs, but it's hard to translate it, right? Like you were saying, you almost need like a bird's eye view to do it. So I've been doing that too, looking at maps. I know there's several, like I said, like dioramas in here, but looking at Google Maps and like getting like a satellite view, and kind of like just getting as much different angles as I can, and then just going on a walk and being like, oh yeah, that's totally not right, and I gotta like move trees over here, and even just like kind of like using my little noggin to like make choices and move stuff around.
It's not a really big space. It's a kind of intimate, with, the way there's a loop trail. And to me, the view, and then you could zoom in to something really specific, like just the campsite is amazing. Thinking about, I think you have to have a latrine in there somewhere, right? You have to have. Why is it even here?
Yeah.
Because this space, I've been in Lolo a long time, before it was like the sign on the highway says, this is where it
Yeah,
was.
totally.
And that's pretty remarkable, but this is not underneath a mobile home park
Right.
Yeah.
or a Walmart or it's flat and,
Yeah.
developable except for wetland area. So the
Mhm.
fact that the creek is here and that it's still what it was is, to me, the riparian area, and that the creek moves around is
Yeah.
is key to why we're even here, or why
Totally.
they were here and why we're here now. So,
Very cool.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, audience really begs the question. There's so many angles you could.
Yeah, and again, like, representation and like trying to like, what perspective do you take and to kind of keep it most open, but I'm sure I'll figure it out eventually.
I'm picturing a beaver talking to the osprey or
Yeah, I like kind of like the
or
animal perspective.
or a woodpecker or something that flies
Yeah.
talking to something that's really in the water a lot.
Totally.
Have a little conversation,
I like that.
something.
Cory, how long does it take you to build something until you reach an end? Is there closure?
Yeah, I think
for
like
you?
I think that's what's great about having like stuff like deadlines or shows or exhibitions, because it kind of forces you to put a pin in it at whatever stage it is. And I think that without that, I think nothing would ever get finished. So it's
Like,
having
just
those-
that closure.
yeah.